Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, we're going to be looking at FreeBSD version 12.1 right after this. I've gotten a couple of requests for doing an installation video on FreeBSD, so as always, I'm going to take a step back and explain what FreeBSD is. It is a Unix-like operating system, and you can't call it, of course, Unix because it isn't, and because Unix is a trademark. FreeBSD requirements always start here for the hardware requirements. It supports, of course, 64-bit Intel or AMD processors. It requires about, they say, 96 megabyte of memory, although in my experience it is taking a lot more than that, probably because of I'm not deselecting some of the all of the non-essential packages during the install. But they do recommend that you give it about 2 to 4 gigabytes of memory if you're going to run a GUI. And it'll take about, according to them, 1.5 gigabytes of disk space. I'm finding it more like about 6.5 gigabytes. And when I'm all done installing, you'll see that. They recommend 8 gigabyte. I'm going to recommend, if you really wanted to use this, you need at least 20 gigabyte, maybe even a little bit more. i386 32-bit is also supported. It also runs on PowerPC, on MIPS, and SPARC64. It runs on ARM, and there is support for RISC-V as well. So it has a pretty wide range of hardware platforms that it will support. But what really is it? So FreeBSD was initially released back in November of 1993. So yeah, it's about 26 years old, a little over 26 years old. The latest release came out last November in 2019. It is based on research Unix, and if you're not familiar with what that term means, when Bell Labs began developing Unix, they split into two different halves. There was the commercial half, which was the programmer's workbench / Unix or PWB Unix, and then there was research Unix, which was used to develop new features and then roll those at some point into the production releases of Unix. And so PWB Unix went on to become System 3, it went on to become System 5, and so forth. So that was their production system or their commercial version, and then the research Linux, they teamed up with Berkeley University to create a platform on which to build new functionality. So they traded code back and forth, and a lot of the early code came from Berkeley that went back into Unix. So, yeah, and I think the last release that BSD took was release 10 of the research Linux. Sometimes you know, if you hear people say, "Oh, I worked on Unix release 8 or 7 or 9 or 10," that's referring to research Linux. Or excuse me, research Unix. So BSD is intended for servers and workstations, embedded systems. It runs network firewalls, and in fact, pfSense is based on FreeBSD. It also is used in storage servers because of ZFS. ZFS being the code that was developed by Sun initially and then taken over by Oracle. So it has a pretty wide range of uses in throughout the market. So BSD is kind of unique. It's a permissive software licensed under the FreeBSD license, unlike Linux, which is released under the GPL version 2. BSD is very similar to Linux, but it is not Linux, and Linux is not Unix. So they share kind of similar ideals in how they make their approaches to doing things, but Linux does not implement all of the things that FreeBSD does, and FreeBSD does not implement all of the things that Linux does. FreeBSD is very much unlike Linux in one respect. Linux, the only thing that the Linux Foundation releases is the kernel. The rest of the software packages come third-party or from the GNU project. So FreeBSD, on the other hand, they release everything. They release the kernel, they release the drivers, the userland utilities, the documentation, program development tools, the compilers, libraries that go with that, all of it. So FreeBSD is also unlike Linux in that it is free and open source, and I know that that this caused the GNU Foundation quite a bit of consternation, but Linux requires that developers return the code that they change. FreeBSD does not. So that's a difference. You're free to use the code, you're free to modify the code, and you do not have to turn it back into them unless you want to. I mean, they certainly will take it. It's just that you're not required by the license in order to do that. There are a number of desktop environments which are available for FreeBSD. There is GNOME and KDE and XFCE. There's also OpenBox, there's Fluxbox, there's DWM, and also BSPWM, and one that everybody always leaves out, which was the first one, which is TWN. And when you deploy Xorg, TWM gets deployed with it, which is the original I think it was called Terminal Window Manager, because really that's what it was. It just managed terminal sessions, so you could have multiple terminal screens up on your machine at once. So in those days, it was X11 terminals, or BLIT terminals, as they were called by AT&T. So yeah, it does support quite a few of those. Now, I'm sure there are others, but those are the only ones that I know of. Now, I'm going to say this, but yeah, FreeBSD does have some direct impact on Apple's OS, the Mac OS. They do supply, of course, Apple's Darwin was based on FreeBSD in the beginning. Of course, it used the Mach kernel. But a lot of the utilities and compilers and things originally came from FreeBSD. Mac OS still has a number of FreeBSD utilities, although I think that number is dwindling as Apple is making it more and more proprietary. And of course, iOS and tvOS and watchOS all include a lot of that code as well. FreeNAS, of course, is based on FreeBSD, and the operating system for Sony PlayStation 3 and 4 is based on FreeBSD as well. So there's a lot of spin-off projects. I did not include NextStep in here because NextStep really had its roots a little higher up in the tree before FreeBSD came out, so I didn't really include them. Although, of course, there were FreeBSD components in NextStep, but most of the system was proprietary and closed. So FreeBSD can run most software that runs on Linux. They have a compatibility layer, which we'll talk about more. It's not an emulator. It is actually a compatibility layer that allows Linux code to run directly. It implements the trusted BSD model, and that was implemented years before in order to make a secure server or a secure workstation. FreeBSD implements jails. I've heard several people call it it's a replacement for chroot. Well, kinda. It's nothing like chroot. It is a better form of containerization. It's similar, but not exactly, but it's similar to LXC and Solaris zones. So if you have multiple jails in FreeBSD, you are sharing a single copy of FreeBSD, the kernel, between them. And that's also true of LXC and also Solaris zones, although Solaris zones does have a root zone where you can install its own kernel as well. I don't believe Jails has implemented that feature. It also implements virtualization, and they call it Beehive, or BHYVE, or Behave. I've heard it called both. Fully supports OpenZFS, and it's native. It's included in the kernel. And it was, I think, one of the first ones to implement mandatory access controls. FreeBSD has always been very I guess, very progressive when it comes to security. They've always been the first to step up and implement new features into the system in order to make it as secure as possible. It also implements access control lists, of course, in order to maintain its POSIX compliance. It is POSIX compliant. It supports the NSA Flask TE implementation, which is the same implementation that is used in SE Linux. It supports, in addition to that, the Sun's basic security model, basic security model, or BSM. Today, that's been moved out to the open source world, and it's called OpenBSM. You can read about it. This is an opinion, so I think it's probably one of the most extensive security audit systems in existence, and a lot of the auditing capabilities of that system they show up both in FreeNAS and also in pfSense. So it's very good, very good. There are a number of shells, but the two that come with it are the TC shell or tick shell, which is used for the root account, and then shell, or the original Bourne shell, for users. And you can also get bash. ZSH is on here. C shell is available, as well as K shell, and K shell goes way back. It has as we talked about earlier, the OS compatibility layer, which allows Linux binaries to run, but it does more than that. It also supports the execution of BSD OS. Now, that's the original BSD, as well as AT&T System 5 Release 4 libraries, and binaries as well. Those will execute in that compatibility layer. So it probably offers one of the most comprehensive suites of software that is available. So it's pretty good in that regard. The kernel, of course, is monolithic, and it supports threads by the libTHR model, which is, for you coders and programmers, it's a one-to-one thread model. And it, of course, supports SMP and SMT. That's the symmetrical multiprocessing and symmetrical multithreading. It does have a very good scaler for event notifications called KQ. So if you're implementing event-based notification systems or event-driven systems, it's very good at that. And in fact, they have, probably at some point down the road, we'll get into that. That's too deep for today's introduction, I think. So I think probably the best place to start is go install it, right? So let me switch over to the full screen, and we'll go bring up boxes. I was going to do this on boxes first, and if it didn't work, I'd put it on hardware. Well, let's just give it a try. I'm going to be running this on Fedora, of course, and I already have an installation here. I'm going to give mine 4 gig of memory. And I'm going to leave I think that's about 21.5. Let's get this down to 4. This is always kind of fun to try to drag it and just get 1/10. There you go. And then we'll go ahead and we'll create it. It will fire it up automatically and start it. Now the bootloader and the driver for the installer is all written in C. And of course, it's text-based, as was all of the early Unix stuff. This is kind of a trip down memory lane. This goes way back. So the first question it asks is, do I want to begin an installation or use the live CD? So this is a live CD, and you can use it as such. I'm not going to. I'm actually going to install it. So there are a number of drivers that you can use for the console, a lot of different languages that are available, as you can see here. I'll just scroll all the way down. Very comprehensive as the number of languages that it supports. So its internationalization features are pretty strong. And I'm going to continue with US because that's where I am. Now, this one, you can just do that, but you have to have a fully qualified name. Otherwise, your machine will not start, oddly enough. And then that's for your host name. And of course, then you come to this screen, which allows you to pick and choose which packages you need and what you want. Ports, I'll probably get into that a little bit later. Ports is a way that you can install packages by compiling them on your machine. So if you're a developer or you're looking for the fastest performance that you can possibly get out of FreeBSD, a lot of people use ports. I don't. I'm done with that. But I'm just going to install the binaries. And then you come to the partitioning of the disk. So there's a number of choices here. The one at the bottom is guided root on ZFS, and that is natively supported by FreeBSD. You will, I think I might be able to back out of here, but you can see that it has a number of different ways that you can install it. I could install this as Stripe, no redundancy. If I have 2 drives, I can do a mirror. A Stripe, of course, it only needs 1 drive to start with, but it will use multiples if you have them. Mirror drive, I need 2 drives to be able to do that. It's a RAID. This is RAID 1, ZFS RAID 1. And so there's Z1, Z2, Z3 that you can use. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to back out and restart this. And it's probably going to make me go all the way back through it until I get back to here. For today, I'm just going to install this as UFS. You can have a manual just set up if you want to go in and partition it the way you want it, or if you don't want to bother with any of the commands that are in here, you can do it yourself from the shell script. But today, I'm just going to do auto UFS. It's fine for this. I'm going to just take the defaults. I could, if I wanted to use UEFI, I could use a GPT, but I'm just going to use an MBR partition, which would be a DOS partition, to do that. And then it should say, okay, I'm going to overwrite the disk, which there's nothing in it anyway. And then it will fetch the distribution and then start to install it. This won't take very long. It's usually pretty quick. A few minutes, if that. So, we're just waiting for this to finish. And then it'll ask me for the root password. So I will go ahead and give it. Wants to know my network interface. This is the only one I have configured for boxes. And then IPv4 is what I want. DHCP is fine for this, for what I'm doing today anyway. I don't need IPv6. Now, it'll bring you up to the configuration to set up your resolver host. And for me, I'm going to put in this. Now, if I hit tab, it's going to jump out of the form. So you want to hit the down arrow to be able to go and edit those other 2. That's just the way it's always. That's the way it's always been, as far as I know. Kind of a strange user interface. Normally, you would think tab would just take you to the next field, but it does not. So I'm going to put in my DNS addresses in my search path for my DNS. It'll then ask you for the time zone. I'm in America. I'm going to go down here to US. Went by it, and then go down and pick Central, which is the closest to me. I'll go ahead and let it set the date, set the time. And then I have some choices here as to what else I might want to install. I can put my own network server up. I can synchronize the system and with the network time at boot, or I can just leave it alone. And now, normally in a secure system, I would disable that to enable crash dumps, because that gives away information on your system that you may not want out. But for today, we'll just leave everything default. If you have some hardening options that you need to put in, there's a number of them that you can use. I'm not going to set any. Again, this is under a VM. I don't really care. It's probably going to get destroyed in a few days anyway. And then it asks, do I want to put any users on the system? And absolutely I do. I'm going to take the defaults for this. I am going to add wheel to the list of groups, and I will need wheel or video in order to bring up a Xorg. So that's the reason why I put wheel in there. That shell is fine. I see that C shell is also an option here. C-Shell is not my favorite. I know there's a lot of people that like C-Shell, but I'm not one of them. So do I want password-based authentication? Yes. Now, there's a number of other models that FreeBSD does support, and you can check the documentation for what those are. Empty password, no. Random password, no. I would prefer to set this myself. And do I want to lock the account out? No. Sometimes some administrators do that in order to create the account before the user, maybe it's a new employee that hasn't arrived yet, and so they'll lock the account out so that no one else can grab it until that employee is on site, and then they'll unlock the account and allow them to log in. And in this event, I'm not going to do that. So do I want to add another user? No. So at this point, I'm done, and I can apply the configuration and add, or I can go back and change anything that maybe I just didn't want. This down here allows me to install the same. This is the same FreeBSD handbook that's on the website, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But and you can have that copy on your system if you want it. And then if I choose the yes here, it'll take me to a shell. And if I need special drivers or something like that, it allows me opportunity to install those before the system reboots. But I don't, so I'm just going to say no. And at this point, it asks me to reboot, and that's what we're going to do. And this reboot, it does send out a message. If there are multiple people on the system, it sends out a message and says, hey, we're rebooting. But it doesn't give a whole lot of time to get off. So, okay. So let's bring this back up. Now, I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and it'll boot into the multi-user mode in 4 seconds, or I can just hit enter and bypass that counter. And this time, we should be going in directly into the hard drive version of the installed FreeBSD. Okay, and you'll notice this is text-based. That's because FreeBSD is a little bit like Arch in that you have to do things to set things up. So it doesn't come with it already set up. But don't worry, we'll get to that. So at this point, let's just make sure, yeah, 12.1 release. And if you're familiar with Solaris at all, or even the older SunOS, you'll notice that uname format is very similar to the way that Solaris and SunOS does it as well. So I need to log in as root here. Oops, wrong password. It won't like that. Okay, so now I'm in. The manager for packages is called PKG. And it works very similar. If you're familiar with APT, it works very similar to that. So I can do an update. And the first time you run a PKG command, it's going to download the cache files for all the packages to your system. And so that's what it's going to do right now. And these, I believe, are updated quarterly. And if it needs to change it, it will do so. It'll do that. And it says all of them are up to date. But if there had been, I would do an upgrade, just like APT. So, except we're not going to run APT, we're going to do package. So if you want to find a file, you do a search. So first, before we do that, let's see what I need. I don't have HTOP. I have top. What about NeoFetch? I doubt that's on here. I bet Glances isn't on here. Nope. So we'll do an APT search. I'm not sure what Glances is called here, so I'm going to do a search on Glances. Oops. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, my Debian is showing. All right, so it says we have two choices. I can install the Python 2.7 version or the Python 3.7. Well, Python 2.7 is dead, so. And you use the install just like APT. I got to stop saying that because I'll start typing it. Now, one thing, I don't have to put in the version number. It will figure that out. And I could have put the other packages on the same line, and so I'll do this one first, and then I'll do the other two together. just to give you a flavor for how that works. So it does kind of a similar operation where it downloads the package and then it checks the integrity and then it installs it. Extracts and installs. And this time we'll put, and we want HTOP together here. And one nice thing about, one other nice thing is I can do a package info and I can put all. I'm going to do a more. This will show you all the packages that are currently on the system. So yeah, it's kind of handy that you can go back and you can see, and it gives you information. Unlike Linux, Linux doesn't tell you this. You have to do two operations in Linux with APT in order to get both the name and the description. So that's the default in OpenBSD, in FreeBSD and OpenBSD and NetBSD. They all do that, as far as I know. So next thing I don't need any more of that. So let's just see what we got here. It says I have 14 packages installed. Do I? Oh, let's just do info word count. 14 packages. So yeah, it does jive. So yeah, we do. Let's take a look at HTOP and see how much memory it's taken. 401 meg. Now, I mean, that's a little high for just a system that's just using text, but there are a lot of packages that got installed that are big. And I notice also that Getty is running here, and Getty is a terminal driver. So that's a serial driver for terminals. There's also one for modems. I bet that's in here too. We can look. No, those are all terminals, and there's 7 of them. We probably should just get rid of those. We certainly don't need those in memory. Let's do glances and see what glances says. So if you've watched many of my videos, you know that this looks very similar to the one that runs under Linux. And it is showing 554 meg being in use. Let's just check both of them. And VMstat is saying 497. 266 meg average, and then the number of pages is 497. So not a lot. All right. So next step, we want to go and we want to install. We want to figure out how to, I don't need that. So I'm just going to go over here and do a search for FreeBSD. And it's freebsd.org is where you go to get this. And then you would do your downloads here. And the production releases is 12.1. They're still supporting 12.0 and 11.3, and they have some upcoming 11.4 and 12.2 are in out beta, I guess. And then you'll have the documentation. You'll have a number of options. And so you can go, there's a full set of man pages here. There's some books. There's documentation about the project itself. And I'm just going to go to handbook. I'm not going to go to Porter's handbook. But this is very good. I mean, it gives you a synopsis about the project, talks about how to install it. It even gives you some basics on FreeBSD as well. So even if you're new to Linux, those would help you because the commands are similar. Until you get down here to the package and the ports, everything else is going to be pretty similar. And then X Windows, it talks about installing X Windows, and that's where I want to go next. So only thing I need to do, it looks like, is to install Xorg. So we'll do that. Oops, I don't want that. I want boxes, please. So we will do package install Xorg. This will take a while, so I'll be back. First, I better get my cursor released. Okay, so that's done. So the next thing I want to do is go back to my instructions here and see what else I need to do. Now, I could just enter start X right now, and that would bring up the terminal windows or TWM. I don't really want to do that. I will tell you that earlier I did try to install KDE, and for some reason on my system under boxes, it would not show the menus. It brought up SDDM just fine. I was able to log in, but when I got to the KDE screen, normally there's like this information that gets passed, and then it starts to set stuff up, and it didn't do that. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened there. So I'm just going to go back, and I'll just install GNOME for today. But, oops, that's XDM. I don't want XDM either. There we go. So, all right, this is another little one that will take quite a bit of time. Oops, not 2, 3. Let's not go back that far. And it looks like it's 3.28.2 is the version. So they're a little bit behind. I think, I don't know what the most current one is, but I know Fedora is running 3.34. So yeah, this will take even longer because as you can see, there's 454 packages there it's got to install. So I'll be back. And that is done, but we're not quite finished with the install. There's a few more things that we're going to have to do. So I'm going to need to go over to here to Etsy and then go into FS tab. And I will need to install the proc file. Let me get read write, and dump and pass are 0. I think that's all I need there. The other thing we'll need to do is to edit the rc.conf file. Now this is where services are started in FreeBSD. So the first thing we'll need is dbus enabled equals yes. And dbus is used for messaging, and I also need the the hardware abstraction layer for Xorg and for GNOME. And then I'll need GDM enabled, which is, of course, the login screen for GNOME. And then I'll need GNOME enabled as well. So if I have everything correct, and I'm just going to double check with that all looks, oh, it's not enabled, it's enable. So there's no D. Okay, probably should have looked up above on SSH because it's right there. Yeah, all right, so almost made a mistake. That would have kept it probably from booting. And at this point, I can restart it. I was going to do, if GNOME for some reason didn't work, I was going to go try XFCE, but in my test, it did come up, and so I'm expecting it to work here unless I configure something wrong. And if I did, no big deal. Like, I can just Alt F1 over to a terminal window and fix it, and then just reboot again. Not the end of the world. But we'll see what's going to happen here. It might pop up with a login down below, and then the screen should flip into the GDM. Yep. And that's exactly what it did. Now, will it come up? And it did. This is a boxes problem where my workstation cursor is on the screen at the same time. So, all right, let's log in and see if we get the GNOME screen. And it looks like we did. I'm not crazy about that background though. So, yeah, it does change throughout the day, but I think I'm going to go with that one. And then while I'm in here, let's just verify that GNOME, yeah, it's 328.2. Also, I don't have anything else I want to do there, but I do have a couple other things I'd like to do. So I'm going to guess this is probably the GNOME browser. So we'll get rid of that. And it has Evolution and the GNOME file manager. I need that. So we'll add that to favorites. And I see Tweaks is on here too. So let's go. Let's see what we've got for choices here. Looks like just Adawada Dark, which is fine. I'll go with that for now. We can always add more themes later. Let's see if we can find, yeah, a new window would be good. So let's see, is that large enough for you to see? Yeah, could be a little bit bigger. Let's go and do my usual thing here. We'll turn that off so it gets the real colors. And we'll turn on the custom font. Bump that up a little bit. And then I'll slide it over so it's on the outside of my photo. Okay, so let's do a package search. Let's see if Firefox is here. Yep. Now this one has both the Firefox ESR and Firefox. So I wonder if it'll, oh, yes. And it is going to put the 73 version out here, so that's good. And then I should have that now visible to me somewhere, probably under. Oh, wait, that's frequent. Let's go to all. That's all. Let's look for it. There it is. Okay, and then we can slide that up. And we'll take this one off. Bye. So that one's gone. As far as, let me go ahead and escape out of that. So as far as packages is concerned, I think we can find, let's see if we can find DPKG. Oh. So yeah, you can if you want to install .deb files, you can do that. And let's look for RPM. And RPM is here as well. So you have a lot of choices. If there's Linux packages that you want to install, you can get the RPMs from the RPM Finder site and download those and then install the deb packages you could bring down from Debian or from Ubuntu and install those as well if you want. Let's go back and check HTOP and see how much memory this has taken now. Yeah, 1.3 gig, but I've seen worse. Glances, 1.48. So, yeah, it does consume some memory, no doubt about it. But as far as responsiveness of the system, it's pretty good. Now, I would not stay with GNOME. I would probably try XFCE next and see if I can get that going. But for today, I think that's kind of going to be where I'm going to leave things. But I think I should probably stop and give you some final impressions that I have of it. It's kind of refreshing to go back and to see a Unix-like system. I have gotten used to Linux, and I like Linux a lot, but I still use BSD for my ZFS storage server. And And the ZFS under Linux is good. It's getting a lot better, but there are still some things that are in BSD that haven't yet been implemented just yet under Linux. It's getting close, but yeah, when that time happens, I'll switch over to Linux and I'll take my FreeBSD system down. But I do hope you enjoyed this today, and if you did, please like and subscribe. And as always, if you're using this and you have some comments, this won't be my last time in visiting FreeBSD. I want to come back and probably do. Some people have been asking me to do a more in-depth ZFS tutorial, kind of an intermediate tutorial on ZFS, and go through some of the other features of ZFS, and so I will do that. And I'll probably use FreeBSD to do that with. So again, hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please like and subscribe. And as always, hope to see you again in the next video. Bye for now.